Download the podcast at kcaaradio.com.
KCAA.
Live and in color from the NBC News radio broadcasting studios of KCAA, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, and 106.5 FM, located in beautiful Southern California, and in parallel from the Turfs Up radio studio in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Thanks for tuning in to the Water Zone show this evening. All right, a pleasant afternoon, morning, or evening, depending where you are in this wonderful world. Hope everybody's doing good. We have our astute associate producer and co-host, Mr. Chris Davey. How are you doing, Chris? Chris? Hello?
I made it, Rob. I'm here, buddy. I was just, I was setting up the second segment there, buddy. But yeah, doing good, buddy. Looking forward to the last show of the year here today. We should tell our listeners, Rob, that next week we won't be on the air with a show, nor will we the 2nd of January as well. And but we do have tonight the infamous and very famous Chris Austin on the line with us, and I think she's ready to tell us what's this dichotomy, Chris, with Northern versus Southern California and the ARs, the atmospheric rivers.
Oh yeah, we're getting lots of rain up here in Northern California. We're doing pretty nicely, but and our fire season is done and over with, but not for you guys down there in Southern California, which can happen. You know, California is a big place. It spans a number of latitudes, so and Southern California can tend to be dry at times. So it's not unheard of, but yeah, the fire season and the dryness continues in the south, and up here in the north, we're expecting some rain, but what really is going on is there's a whole bunch of atmospheric rivers headed our way. I think the headline in the San Francisco Chronicle was just a touch too enthusiastic. I think
saw that.
Yeah. I don't think we're going to get a whole lot, but we'll certainly get snow and rain, and that is good. But who's really going to get hammered is the Pacific Northwest and Oregon and Washington. And it seems to be part of this larger trend of the atmospheric rivers shifting toward the poles and kind of, moving up north. So these are the storms that were the kind of storms that were hitting us this last decade that are now seem to be moving up north. One of the challenges of this for the folks in the Pacific Northwest is that while they are used to lots of rain, it does rain a lot up in that area, not quite at the intensity that these atmospheric rivers can bring. So they're having to really work at managing through those storms, and it's difficult. We are kind of used to them, so send them our way. But Mother Nature doesn't seem to be agreeing with that.
Well, we should start playing that song "Cry Me a River" when you tell us it's ready to come, and then we'll let that happen. So, one quickie thing I just want to tell our audience, we apologize for last week. The studio was having some technical difficulties in playing the interview that we did with Mr. Brad Lazell from Arctic Ice, and we sent them a corrected one. So if you go to the Toro website, Chris, why don't you give that out?
Yeah, so it's waterzone.podcast.toro.com, and you can download the edited version there.
Yeah, and there's a lot of blank outs and things like that. They had a computer problem, so we apologize from that. And Chris, somebody asked me a question, and I can't answer it, and I have to ask you that. So, because they say you're a very smart guy, and you know how to answer everything and do everything, and I respect that a lot. So imagine you're in a car, you're headed north, and you see a red fire engine to your right, and a fence to your left, and then there's a horse in front of you and a helicopter behind you. What do you do? What should you do?
That's one of those things that says a train leaves Chicago at 65 miles an hour heading northeast. How many shingles do you need to put a new roof on your house?
No, actually, the answer is you put down your drink and carefully get off the merry-go-round.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like it.
Anyway, but I thanks for letting me break it. I just wanted to let the people know about the technical issues we had last week, and they can't get the new version on that one, and hopefully within a day or two on all the other 17 media platforms. So I'm sorry to interrupt with that, but I just thought that was important because when people listen to it, they're going to go, "What the blank is going on with these guys?" So anyway,
that's a good one. So I'm going to ask Chris. If you're a weather watcher like I am, and Chris, I know you are too, if you look at the map of California and you watch those atmospheric rivers come from west to east across California, if you look at the map and pinpoint Point Conception, it seems like this season with all the 5 or 6 atmospheric rivers that have already occurred, all of them have landed in California above Point Conception. Is that, that's not particularly normal, is it? I mean, I don't know if it's an omen for the rest of the season.
Yeah, it's really hard to say. In general, atmospheric rivers, where they make landfall, can be highly variable. But they were definitely, I think, in the last decade, they seem to be tracking a little farther south, kind of hitting more like the Russian River in the Bay Area a lot. And the Russian River really learned to deal with these because the Russian River was very flood prone. So it took a lot of work for them to get better prepared. And that's, I think, where they kind of came up with this or sort of discovered this concept of the atmospheric river is from the work that was done in the Russian River basin. But they say it appears that they're moving northward, and that is due, the studies say, that it's probably due to the change in sea surface temperatures.
Yeah.
The ocean is warming up, and so it's going to start changing things and changing things in some very unpredictable ways. So, this will be probably just one of several changes that are coming our way, new features, I guess.
I had read that the Earth has experienced some shift in its axis. Do you think that could affect what's happening with that?
I think it could. I mean, it could affect any. I mean, who's to say? I don't think we have a lot of experiments with tilting axis on the planet to really know what that means. But we have moved things around. You figure that the Earth is spinning around, and we have moved heavy things around. So specifically, we've pumped a lot of groundwater out of the ground, and it's made its way to the sea and not being replenished. Like, think of the Ogallala Aquifer in the Midwest, spanning 7 states. It's really come down. It used to be quite a big aquifer, and it's really, they're now experiencing the same groundwater issues as is California. And all that water went somewhere, and we say that there's no new water. It's all part of this water cycle. So when you're moving around things that are heavy on a spinning disk, it's going to make some changes. That's not to be, that shouldn't be particularly surprising, but what those changes could be, I don't know how we would be able to tell that,
Yeah. No, I guess, I totally believe that. I just think we're going through cycles. Maybe this thing happened a couple million years ago, a couple 100,000 years ago, that we're just keep doing this. And, obviously data wasn't collected way back then about the weather a lot.
They have been able to reconstruct quite a lot of it. There's a whole science called paleo science,
yes.
and they can figure out quite a lot of things from soil borings and tree rings and fossils and stuff like that. And, so far, no one has found, I don't believe they've found carbon dioxide levels to the levels that they are today. So, now I don't read all of that paleo research. I might be wrong, but I believe that's what I've heard, that these are unprecedented in any climate record that we could reconstruct. Now, could have it happened? Sure, because we can't reconstruct everything, and, we're definitely moving into some uncharted territory here.
It was interesting, Chris, because about 5 months ago, on Maven's notebook, there was, I don't know if it was from paleo scientists or the paleo science you were referring to, but because on the Earth we have built so many tall buildings, and we are on, as you say, a rotating or a spinning globe, right?
Right. We're moving stuff around, heavy stuff around.
Yeah, right. Those taller buildings are reaching out farther from the surface of the Earth and slowing the rotation. I don't know by how much. I'm not a physical scientist, but I remember that article probably more than 5 months ago, probably March or April of last year, Chris. But anyway, interesting stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, and then you talk about the heavy buildings. That's also what they've come to realize is that a lot of these cities, coastal cities with these big, tall buildings are actually sinking.
Right.
So, that combined with the rising sea levels, is going to be problematic, here in not too long. And we're, on the West Coast I know there's some reason I can't recall having read it, but and it's probably due to the geology of the oceans. The East Coast having the continental shelf and maybe the West Coast not, but we have not seen the impacts of sea level rise as much as they are happening on the East Coast, and they're actually accelerating on the East Coast at this point. So, we'll see. I guess we'll see what happens.
Do you think the intensive bombing in Europe and the Middle East puts a toll on the Earth and its axis?
Perhaps. I have no idea. That is not an area that I study. But I will operate under the premise that all bombing is bad. So let's not bomb.
I totally agree to that. So how's the Metropolitan Water District doing with the decision about paying for the Delta? Well,
they did decide at their meeting a week or two ago, they did decide to vote continued planning costs, because what the ask before them was to fund the remainder of the cost to get the tunnel permitted and ready to build. One of the criticisms that came out of the last tunnel process, called the Cal Water Fix, is the agency said, you're asking us to commit to this project and we don't even know if it's permittable. So they decided this time they're going to take the project up to the point where they've got the permits for it, and then they will ask people to pay for the whole thing. So the Delta advocates were very disappointed that Metropolitan decided to do this, but I gotta believe that we're talking about a business decision here, and after all the money that's been invested in the tunnel to this point, 3 different iterations of this project, and we're up here now, it would be the only prudent business decision to finish the planning process and make the final decision in 2 years when they are asked to make it, because if Metropolitan backed out now, then that would essentially kill the project. There would be no way to finish the funding. I mean, that would be it. So I think that they made the decision that a business person would make, and I think I kind of think it's the right decision, because I think they should get it all done and up to the point, and then we can have a discussion about whether they should build the whole thing or not, knowing that there's a permittable project in the works. And it may not be a permittable project. It's facing a lot of opposition. So we'll see. And what was interesting about the discussion at Metropolitan is you could tell that not all the directors are necessarily on board with the project either. So its final approval at Metropolitan is in no way guaranteed.
Well, the battle goes on forever and ever, so hopefully this will get resolved.
It's California water.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Chris, we thank you for coming on today, and I hear you're going to get some rain, so it's going to be a little wet where you live, but you'll stay dry because you got a lot of typing to do every single night. So we appreciate that. For our listeners, please go to what I'm talking about is mavensnotebook.com, and Chris is the purveyor of that. And we get, Chris Davey and I get our information every single day when we turn on our laptops or PC. And again, I don't know how Chris Austin gets all this information out every single day, but it's the best way to get what's going on in the world of water. You can also become a sponsor, which is a good thing to do. Contribute anything from $1 up to whatever you'd like. Helps support Maven's Notebook, and it's a good accredited documentation that she puts out every single day. So, Chris, we wish you a good, happy holidays, and we'll be back in after January, in the beginning of January. So we'll see you then. Stay healthy. Have a happy holiday and be safe.
All right. Happy holidays, everyone. Talk to you all next year.
Hey,
You too, Chris.
Mr. Davey, I think you said you had another correction you wanted to.
I do. So I got my hand slapped by the folks that watch what we say on the show here, and so I apparently had the WaterZone website address bass-ackward, as they say in the political world. But hey, just so our listeners know, if you want to see if you want to hear and listen again to the podcast that we did from Arctic Freshwater last year, it is at waterzone.podcast.toro.com. And I think the last time I had the first two words backwards, Rob. So hopefully I can redeem my endlessly banished honors.
No problem. You did good. All right, we're going to take a little break, and we got some really special guests on today, and it's more on our series about produced water, which is really an interesting topic and things that's going to be happening all over the country and all over the world. It's a neat idea to do that, and we'll learn a little bit more in just a minute. We're going to take a quick 1-minute break, and we'll be right back.
This fall, the partner points will add up like never before with SiteOne's Fall into Points promotion. For a limited time, earn triple points on all FX Luminaire products, as well as double points on Hunter valves, sprays, and nozzles. Hunter and FX Luminaire, industry leaders in irrigation and lighting, are here to make sure you're getting the quality and performance your projects and customers demand. Plus, for the first time ever, customers in the Hunter Preferred program will earn 100 Hunter Preferred program bonus points when they buy $1,500 or more of FX Luminaire or Hunter products at one time. Get ready to fall into points this September and October at SiteOne.
Mr. Rob, you're muted, buddy.
Oh, I thought it might be better if I was muted. Sorry about that. Welcome back, and just want to remind everybody, we have a series that we've been doing on produced water, and we have very lucky to have Mr. Mike Hightower. Mike is currently director of the New Mexico Produced Water Research Consortium, and that's a joint effort of the New Mexico Environment Department of New Mexico State University. Mike's retired from Sandia National Laboratories, where he worked in aerospace, weapons, energy, and natural resource research and engineering. Mike holds a bachelor's and master's degrees in civil and environmental engineering from New Mexico State University, and for the past 3 decades is focused on approaches to enhance critical infrastructure and natural resource stewardship and security. So, Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rob. Good to be here again.
Oh, we appreciate that. This has been gaining a lot of notice on our live site and as well as the media platforms as it turns to a podcast. And I mean, we're talking mucho people, like over 70,000 people listen to the live portions on the NBC affiliates, and then close to, what's the number, Chris, on the downloads?
Oh my gosh, we are, so the last one we did, Mike, close to 250,000, buddy. So, I mean, we're, knock on wood, and in my case, simulated wood grain Formica, but that'll do.
So, so we're excited about that. So, I know you have two gentlemen that came along as on the conference with us, and I'll let you do the honors of introducing them.
All righty. Thank you very much. So in the past, we've had on some of our other podcasts on produced water, which is water produced with oil and gas operations. We've had national level representatives from the EPA and the Bureau of Reclamation talking about their programs in produced water treatment research. We've had representatives on from communities in the western states that are interested in using these non-traditional waters like produced water for economic development to address some of their drought issues in the West. And this time, what I've brought together are two individuals that represent the oil and gas industry. One is Paul Barber from Devon Energy out of Oklahoma City. They're a big producer of oil and gas in the western states and are looking very closely at the treatment and reuse of produced water. I also have on Rick McCurdy from Select Water Systems. They're a midstream company in the West. They work in many states, collecting water from many producers and then disposing of that and managing those water supplies. So today we're going to have kind of an industry forum on what they see the directions of produced water as a resource. As I say, these gentlemen are operating in multiple states across the U.S., so they have a good perspective on what we're seeing both in the Permian Basin in New Mexico, other basins in Colorado and other states, Oklahoma, and the general direction that industry is taking to try to address water stewardship issues in a lot of these states where there are water supply stress, and produced water could be water to be used to support additional water resource development in these states. So I've got a couple questions for Paul and Rick to start off with. Rob, is that all right? Then I'll open it up for your questions and questions from the audience.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Enough?
Yep, go ahead.
So, Paul and Rick, are you both on?
I'm here, Mike.
Yes, Mike. I'm here, Mike.
Okay, great, fantastic. So, Paul, being with one of the major oil companies in the West, based out of Oklahoma City, you started a lot of work on treatment and reuse of produced water. And maybe you can tell the audience, maybe from an industry perspective, what you're seeing now over the course of the last 4 or 5 years and the work that you're doing, and where you're seeing water stewardship, how it's playing out in produced water treatment, reuse, recycling to try and, one, minimize fresh water, and two, create new water supplies for the communities that you may be operating in. So would you just give us a little background on what your company and some of the other companies like yours are doing and the drivers for that?
Absolutely, Mike. I'm going to go back a little bit further than 4 or 5 years, because this is a long-standing trend, and produced water stewardship and water stewardship in general has been important to Devon for a long time. Going back to the early days of the shale boom back in 2004, Devon was one of the first to utilize produced water within our operations there in the Barnett Shale around the Fort Worth area. And we just continued to expand on that even more, especially since we started to develop the Permian Basin, which is our most active basin in southeast New Mexico and West Texas. That is a very arid region, very limited freshwater resources. So finding an alternative for our operations was key. And so we started to really evaluate using produced water to minimize our demand on fresh water. And it took a lot of collaboration with different vendors and regulators to figure that out. But we've, made significant progress there and figured out how to do it technically. And since then have made, investments in gathering systems that allow us to deliver this water across the basin. So the gathering systems, for the listeners, connect all of our wells, and we can move that water around the basin without having to truck it. So it significantly makes the roads safer because you don't have nearly as many trucks on the road, and obviously you've got reduced emissions because of that. So we can move that water to centralized treatment facilities where we can then treat that water and then store it in ponds to use for our completions operations. So we found a lot of good ways to utilize this water within our own drilling and completions operations. And so the natural next progression of that is to look for ways to utilize this water outside of oil and gas. And that led us to doing a desalination pilot this past summer. We had a lot of really good results with that. We had it out at one of our treatment facilities in the middle of the Permian Basin. So we got to see all the variability that you're going to see in a real life operation. But we had 97% uptime, and we were consistently producing a water that was less than 500 TDS from a starting point on average of around 118,000 TDS. So we were really able to clean up that water really nicely and looking for ways to utilize this water as a resource as opposed to just something we have to deal with as an operator. And this is just the natural progression of water stewardship.
Thanks, Paul. Rick, I'm going to ask you almost exactly the same question. You've been used as an expert by the federal government in activities with the Department of Energy, looking at produced water reuse for a number of years. You've been working in this area on recycling and treatment and reuse inside and outside oil and gas for a decade or more, a couple of decades almost. When we first met, I think the first time at DOE. And you work for a company, Select Water, that is one of the largest water midstreams in the country. I think you're handling well over a million barrels of water a day, 440 million gallons of water a day for the oil and gas industry. And so you work in a lot of states. Are you seeing the same kinds of things that Paul is talking about, this drive toward, from perspective of inside oil and gas, of being better water stewards, trying to reduce fresh water use, recycling as much water as you can within oil and gas, and then using additional water for uses outside oil and gas? Is that a trend that you're seeing too, both in New Mexico and across all of the states that you operate in?
Oh, absolutely. And I appreciate the opportunity to be on your podcast today. I've been talking, as Mike says, I've been talking about produced water for quite some time now. Just as a little bit of background, I'm a 44-year industry veteran in the oil and gas industry, predominantly always in the U.S., from Alaska to the Gulf, California to the northeastern Pennsylvania. And all of my career, I've worked with produced water. And I've really been focused on using that produced water within our own operations so that we can minimize fresh water use. And I'm seeing that trend continually move that way. I say all the time, there's nothing better that we can do from a sustainability standpoint than reusing that water as opposed to using fresh water, particularly in the arid environments that we work in. And then I'm really excited, as Paul mentioned, I'm really excited now that we're starting to move into this phase to where we think we're going to be able to recover some volume of a, quote, fresh water from this produced brine. And to do that, then not only are we offsetting freshwater use, but we're starting to add water back into the environment, that wasn't there to start with. And I've been talking recycling produced water, as Mike says, for well over probably close to 2 decades now, and really been pushing this concept of beneficial use for several years. The issue has always been, as much as we want to do it, the economics just didn't work out. It cost way too much money to try to recover some volume of fresh water from this hypersaline brine. But we're seeing a confluence of 2 different things here. We're seeing the cost of treatment gradually coming down as technology improves, while we're seeing the cost of alternative disposal increasing. And they're coming down to where we're getting to an inflection point to where it is going to make economic sense. And once we do that, it's going to be very good for the areas that we operate.
Thanks, Rick. Paul, are you seeing the same types of trends that Rick mentioned? The costs coming down for treatment, and you just talked about your pilot that you did recently, and the cost of disposal going up, and the fact that we're at a point in many basins where we can do that more cost effectively than just disposing of it and then not using that water at all. We can make use of that water for better water stewardship for the communities we work in. Are you seeing this? Do you see the same trend?
Absolutely, Mike. You know, it's always dynamic and there's a lot of things changing, but with the new technologies that are coming out, you know, they're getting better if it's a thermal technology at how do we reuse heat within the system to make it more efficient, looking for ways to harness waste heat that they have out in the field. Those are driving down costs. There's also some, you know, exciting chemical-based desalination technologies that are still early on, but if they're successful, they could significantly change the cost curve in terms of water treatment. So we're starting to see those things and see those treatment costs come down. But like you guys said, on the other side of things, disposal cost continues to go up. Pore space is a scarce resource. So as those 2 things converge, there's just more and more possibilities with this water in utilizing it outside of oil and gas, and the economics are starting to make a lot more sense.
Okay. Rob, I'm about to open this up for your callers, you and Chris both. I did want to mention that there are a few places in the United States where we're recycling produced water and using it outside oil and gas currently. A lot of those places happen to be where the cost of disposal is pretty high, and so treatment is cost effective today. So we have places in Pennsylvania that have been using treated produced water outside oil and gas, putting it in river systems since at least for a decade. California has been using treated produced water in the Central Valley for about 2 decades, 20 years, 25 years. And there's been some activities in Wyoming where they've been using and treating produced water there and using it outside oil and gas for a while. So I think this is a trend that we're seeing across many states in the West and even eastern states, where we're looking at this as the non-traditional water that with the new innovations in technology, we can reuse it. So I think with these experts on, I think participants may want to call in or not call in, go into the chat and ask questions, and we'll take the questions now for Rick and Paul.
Okay, excellent. I have a quick question to start off, and I'll turn it over to Chris. You were talking about brine, both you gentlemen, and how you can reharvest the heat and things like that. Is there a way when you're pumping, because I'm not in your business, but when you're pumping the oil out of the ground and you have this water coming, can you turn that into electricity because of the pressure that you're using to generate that force? Has that been looked at?
Rick,
yeah, Rob, I'll jump in. That has been looked at, particularly now. it depends on how we're producing it. If it's a naturally flowing well, in other words, the reservoir pressure is pushing all that fluid up to the surface.
Yes, that's nothing.
You can use that force to possibly drive a turbine, an inline turbine, to generate some electricity out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, conversely, a lot of our wells, once they get past that initial flowing phase, then we have to put submerged pumps in the ground to lift the fluid. Well, then you kind of becomes counterproductive because you're using electricity to lift the fluid, and if you put a turbine in there, you would have to spend more on electricity than what you would get out of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is possible. There is also some studies being done on geothermal aspects, because several of our producing formations bring water to the surface at somewhere in the neighborhood around 170, 180 degrees Fahrenheit. So there could be the possibility to use those for a geothermal function to drive some new power demand.
Okay. All right, Chris, I'll turn some over to you.
Yeah, great. First, let me say, Mike Hightower, thanks again for allowing us to continue this discussion on produced water. And I'd like to welcome Paul and Rick, both of you, to the Water Zone, gents. Luckily enough, there's enough people listening. They are now buying those last-minute Christmas gifts right now, and there seems to be some interest, and I have several questions. And I'm going to put the first one out here, because we've talked a little bit about, reliance on fresh water, reducing the reliance on fresh water. But one of the questions that has come up several times here on the chat board since you guys have been on is there any quantifiable numbers to, what's the size of the resource? Especially here, one person is asking particularly for the Permian Basin. And I don't believe, I may have missed it, but if you had discussed that so far, I might have been writing down a question, but I missed it. But is there any quantifiable numbers as to what is the size of the resource, this produced water resource?
So
I
can. This is Mike. I can answer that real quickly, and we'll let Paul and
cool.
Rick add in. Right now, we're looking at, and I'll use the Permian Basin. It's the one I know the best. We're looking at something on the order of 20 million barrels a day, 22 million barrels a day of produced water generated in the Permian Basin. Put that in gallons. That's about 800 million gallons a day. That water is saline. We think that we can recover probably 50% of that. And all the testing that we've been doing shows that that's about the right quantity in that 50 to 60% range. That means that there's 400 million gallons a day in the Permian, which is in southeastern New Mexico and West Texas, that would potentially be available for uses outside oil and gas. That's a lot of water. That 400 million gallons a day is a lot of water for a region where a lot of small communities, need that water supply. So, Rick and Paul, you might want to modify those numbers, but I think that's the right ballpark for the Permian, for an example.
I agree with you, Mike, and I think we heard something just the other day that if we looked at just the West Texas part of the Permian Basin, if we could recover 50% of all the water that's currently produced there out of oil and gas wells and return that as fresh water for irrigation, we could irrigate 25,000 acres of cotton.
No, it's huge.
I do want to mention that not all the basins are as prolific in water as the Permian Basin, but there are other basins that have water that's a lower TDS, higher quality, that we could get more recovery. But someone asked about the Permian, so that's the values on the Permian. Other basins are going to be a little bit different, and it's going to vary across the west and east and the far west. But there can be some big numbers in values of potential fresh, treated, produced water available for reuse in some of these states. Okay. Other questions, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of one that relates a little bit to it. in terms of the 50% recycling that you think is good. What do you do with that 50%, and what happens to the other 50%?
I'll let the industry talk about their current practices and what kind of we're planning on doing, and industry is looking at for that 50% that is concentrated up. So, Rick, maybe you and Paul could talk about what you're looking at.
Sure, and I'll I don't want to hog the conversation. I want to hear Paul's thoughts on this as well. But so here's what we're currently doing with this produced water. The vast majority of it gets, while we're trying to recycle as much as we can, a whole lot of it gets disposed of underground in non-productive formations. These are typically anywhere from 1 to 2 miles below the surface of the earth. They're contained in these formations, and we go down to where there's pore space, and we pump this produced water into there to where it's stored forever. But as Paul mentioned earlier, pore space is becoming scarce because this has been going on for decades and decades, and eventually you're starting to fill up this pore space, and then you see pressure start to rise in these zones, which causes other problems. What we're hoping to do when we take this produced water and we get to the point to where we can thermally distill it or use membrane distillation, and we recover 50%, that 50% is going to be a very low TDS fresh water. Ideally, we've kind of got a hierarchy of what we think we would do with it. One thing would be irrigation, non-edible crops, but another thing could be irrigation of something like irrigation of range grasses could be the next step. What we hope to do with the 50% that's left behind, that's going to be a concentrated, highly saline brine. We're going to continue to put that and dispose of it underground, but we're hoping to reduce the volume that we're putting down hole by recovering 50% of the volume out as fresh water.
All right. Paul, you have a comment?
Yeah, Rick summed it up nicely, but one of the other things that we're looking at are there industries that could utilize this water? So, using it for agriculture is obviously a good thing and something we're looking at, but what other industries can we bring out to the Permian Basin that can utilize this produced water? So I think it's a really good feedstock for industrial uses, and that could be a really, really big opportunity, and that's something that we're looking at. But like Rick mentioned, if we can get 50% yield off of this water and continue to dispose of the heavy brine as we have been, I think that's a huge win.
You guys are right above or right close to the Ogallala Aquifer. One of the questions popping up on the chat here, is there any danger of contaminating the aquifer?
The one danger that we see I'll jump in there. We are seeing some issues out in West Texas with what is referred to as purging events, where we're seeing we've got these shallower disposal zones that are roughly down about 4,000 or 5,000 feet. They're starting to pressure up. There appears to be some connection to where some of these zones are hitting some older abandoned wells and are possibly coming up through those wells, and we're seeing produced water come to the surface. It's unknown whether or not that's getting into the freshwater aquifer at the time. In the areas where it's happening, the Ogallala doesn't extend down that far, so I don't think there's any danger of the Ogallala there. But we do take very special care anytime we're drilling wells. The first thing we do on this, what we call the surface part of the well, which is the part that's going to extend down through any surface freshwater aquifers, that's typically drilled with nothing but fresh water. We don't use produced water for that. That's one thing where we don't recycle it. So we'll typically drill down through that surface section using only fresh water. Then we go down and we set cement and casing, a steel casing, through that section, put cement on the outside of it to protect it. And that way we ensure that for the remainder of the well, there's no way that any of those produced fluids can come back up whole to make it to where that aquifer's at.
In comparing wells, is there a difference between the oil wells and a gas well of how much water is being produced from those? Do they produce the same amount of volumes of water with the oil well, and does that differ than a gas well to produce water in different proportions?
So that's every different formation that we go after, that we produce out of, they all have different varying rates of production, and I'll try to throw out some examples here. And it's not so much because you can have gas wells that make a lot of water, but they become very uneconomical very quickly if they are making water because the gas prices are so diluted as compared to what the price of oil is. In northeastern Pennsylvania, in the Marcellus gas formation up there, you typically, those wells only produce maybe 5 to 10 barrels of water a day. You come down to the Barnett Shale, as Paul mentioned earlier, in North Texas in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, that's a gas-producing zone, but those wells may make as much as 50 or 60 or 70 barrels of water a day. So it can vary. The oil wells, and they vary by areas. Well, in the Permian Basin, the Midland side makes roughly, or the Midland Basin, which is the eastern half of the Permian Basin, makes about 4 barrels of water for every barrel of oil. The Delaware Basin, which is the western side, can make 5 to 7 barrels of water for every barrel of oil. You drop down to South Texas to the Eagle Ford Formation, and it makes less water than that. So it varies all across the U.S. according just to the different geographic areas and the different zones that we're producing out of.
So when you treat this water in the different locations, again, I'm asking because I'm not familiar enough with what you guys are doing and where you're actually located on doing these wells. Are you near a facility, aside from the facility that you build to treat the water, does it get delivered to any other cities? And is there pipelines to move that water, or is that something that you have to construct to do?
In the Permian Basin, it's pretty remote, especially on the western side, on the Delaware side. In Midland, you're closer to more populated areas, but from anything I know, you're not delivering that water to anything. It is all going to disposal wells today or to recycle within your operations. But
okay.
If you were to, that's something we would need to build out even more going forward as we have, more uses for this water.
Is there grants that the government offers to help construct a gateway for that produced water to somewhere other location and tie into an existing operating system of water?
So good question, Rob. And there are some funding opportunities that are being developed now. Texas, in this past legislative cycle, they had put up what they call their Water for Texas Fund. It's I believe $1 billion fund, and part of that money it isn't available. It's not for industry to come in and ask for it. What it would be for is for a municipality or a general area or a water district to come in and say just exactly what you were talking about. We would like to take water from this recycling facility, this beneficial reuse facility, and use it, but we're going to need $10 million to construct a pipeline to get it to us. And so they would be able to get some no-interest bonds through that to help with that. I believe, and I don't know for sure, Mike can talk more about this, but in New Mexico we have the strategic water supply that they're in the process of trying to develop up there, and I believe it will probably have some similar opportunities in it for areas that would like to use that water to find out. Because as Paul says, with very few exceptions, most of the oil and gas operations tend to be remote away from the larger cities. It tends to be out in remote areas. An exception to that is the Barnett Shale, which is just basically lies underneath Dallas and Fort Worth. But most of the other times, it's out away from the major cities. So where the water would be processed and where it would be available, then we're going to have to figure out how to get it to who could use it.
Okay. I was out in Gallup, New Mexico a while back working with the water districts over there and to a Navajo reservation. And they were desperately in need of more water and things like that sort. And it was interesting working with them for a couple months on a project. And I know there's other places throughout the country, Colorado and other things that, and a lot of these Indian reservations that need to get water. And it's just tough, and it's expensive. I mean, as you said, it's millions of dollars to build a pipeline or do any of this stuff. But I'm glad the government is at least offering some availability of money to some of these, water districts and agencies that can utilize that. Because there's lots of people, even here I'm not in California anymore, but my office is. But even in Central California, there's desperate need for water, and I think new ways and new technology. I was just talking to Chris the other day about a company that does a floating desalination plant in the ocean, and the pressure from the bottom of the ocean helps pump water up through that. And Chris, can you expand upon that a little bit? Because you're the one who told me about that.
Yeah, it was a pretty neat deal. I was reading about, using 400 meters deep. At 400 meters deep, the water pressure is enough to duplicate what happens in desalination plants at the water surface, at the ocean surface. So there's a lot of technology in there. But hey, guys, I want to give you a chance maybe to talk just in the last 4 minutes we've got here about some of the other benefits, because I'm being pointed out here, looking at the chat site, that other than reducing freshwater reliance, because there is a limited amount of fresh water out there, and protecting surface and groundwater supplies. Have you heard anything about the use of produced water kind of helping with mitigating other costs that are involved in water, like the infrastructure that needs to be built? Surely something like this has got to have an impact there.
So Rick, or Paul, do you want to jump? You want me to? I can address it.
No.
Rick,
One of the things we've done there is we continue to strive more and more on. We're trying to use as much produced water as we can, right, to move this thing forward. And for an example, the company I work for, Select Water Solutions, we're the largest water recycler in the U.S. And this is the speed at which it's growing. In 2022, we recycled 192 million barrels of produced water and reused it in place of fresh water. In 2023, we recycled 248 million barrels and used it in place. To do that, we had to build a tremendous amount of infrastructure to where we can move that water from one spot to another. We're currently in the process of constructing a gathering system in the northern Delaware Basin that's going to have 35 million barrels of water storage capacity to where we can move it to operators to use in place of fresh water.
Oh, excellent. Well, Mike, Rick, and Paul, we really thank you. We'd love to come back and follow up with you on some of the projects that you're working in and talk more about the benefits and things of what you're doing. A very interesting topic.
I'd also like to talk about the technology involved in doing this, right? We didn't even get a chance to get into that with you guys. But so, hey, just an open invitation for another time.
Yeah, so we do appreciate.
We'll have a session.
You bet, guys, and appreciate the opportunity.
You got it. Great.
Appreciate the opportunity to be on here and be happy to come back.
Absolutely. We appreciate that. So we're going to be back in 2 weeks, or actually 3 weeks. We're taking 2 weeks off for the Christmas holidays and such. So one thing that Chris and I tell all our listeners every single week is please help keep our planet blue. Because if you like green, you got to have blue. So good night, everybody. Have a happy holidays, and we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks. And if you have any questions, send us an email or give us a call. We'll be glad to get that information to you. And thank you again for making Water Zone a great show. And hopefully we'll get to be number one again on some of these radio shows and things. So thanks a lot. We appreciate that.
NBC News on KC.